Roy Patterson was done. Completely and utterly done. At 67 years old, his back screamed at him every morning when he hauled himself out of bed. 49 years of working in machine shops, crawling under engines, twisting into impossible positions to reach that one stubborn bolt. His knees popped when he walked, his shoulders ached when it rained, and his hands were so calloused they felt like leather gloves. But none of that compared to the daily torture of the interdimensional bus. Every single morning, Roy crammed himself into that sardine can on wheels alongside 300 other miserable commuters. The Vrelian passengers with their massive bodies, always spread out across two seats like they owned the place. Their thick, scaly skin brushed against anyone unfortunate enough to sit nearby. And the Kolnari families? Their hatchlings never shut up. High-pitched screeching that could pierce eardrums from the moment the bus left the station until it finally reached the industrial district. Roy had spent the last 6 months fantasizing about alternatives. Getting his own transport. Something small, something reliable. But everything cost a fortune. A decent personal shuttle ran at least 50,000 credits. Even the used ones were priced like they were made of gold. Then Roy saw the advertisement for the Galactic surplus auction on Station Gamma 7. Today was different. Today, Roy stood at the back of a massive warehouse filled with alien traders, corporate buyers, and scrap dealers. The air smelled like old metal and recycled atmosphere. He clutched a thin catalog in his oil-stained hands, flipping through lots of outdated mining equipment, obsolete computer cores, and decommissioned station parts. Then he found it. Lot 847. The auctioneer stepped up to the podium, a tall Threxian whose purple skin shifted through different shades whenever he got bored. Right now he looked particularly uninterested. His 3 eyes barely glanced at the lot display behind him. Lot 847, he announced in a flat, mechanical tone. 3 human colony vessels from the failed expansion era. Quantum drives listed as non-functional. Hull integrity compromised. Selling as-is for parts or scrap metal. No warranties, no returns, no guarantees of any kind. Laughter erupted across the warehouse. A Drellian merchant near the front actually slapped his knee. Someone in the middle of the crowd shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "Humans couldn't even make their own ships work. What junk." More laughter. Even the auctioneer's skin flickered with amusement. Roy felt every eye in that room looking down on his species. Looking down on human engineering, human innovation, human pride. These aliens thought they knew everything. They thought their standardized, mass-produced, cookie-cutter technology was superior. They had no idea what they were looking at. Roy raised his paddle high. 400 credits. The laughter died instantly. Complete silence filled the warehouse. Alien heads turned, searching for the source of the bid. When they spotted the old human in the back, wearing a faded work jacket and a greasy cap, disbelief rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked all 3 eyes in succession, clearly stunned. 400 credits? Once? He paused, waiting. His skin shifted to a confused orange color. 400 credits twice? Another long pause. Surely someone would step in and stop this madness. Surely someone would save this foolish human from himself. Nothing. Sold to the human in the back. Roy walked through the parting crowd toward the payment terminal. Whispers followed him like shadows. He caught fragments of conversations in a dozen different languages, all saying the same thing. Crazy old fool. Throwing his retirement away. Those ships are worthless. Dead metal. Complete waste of money. Roy just smiled. Let them talk. Let them think what they wanted. He paid in cash. Physical credit chips, counted out one by one. The payment processor, a bored-looking Zentari, barely acknowledged him. At the dock administrator's office, Roy found himself facing a young Keltorian clerk with bright green skin and concerned eyes. The clerk pulled up the files on his screen, and his expression grew more worried with each line he read. "Sir, I really must warn you about these vessels," the clerk said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. "According to our scans, they are completely inoperable. The quantum cores show 0 energy signatures. They're burned out beyond any hope of repair. The structural integrity readings are at 14%. Honestly, these ships are one strong solar wind away from falling apart. We can arrange for proper disposal if you'd like. It would save you the trouble and embarrassment." Roy adjusted his worn cap and met the young alien's eyes. "Just need the docking bay coordinates, son. I'll handle the rest myself." The clerk stared at him for a long moment, then shrugged with all 4 of his shoulders. He transferred the location data to Roy's handheld device. Bay 7 Delta. That's in the station's graveyard section. Good luck, I guess. That evening, as the station's artificial sun dimmed to simulate night, Roy made his way to Bay 7 Delta. The graveyard section was exactly what it sounded like. A forgotten corner of the station where broken things went to rust in peace. There they were. His 3 ships. Massive hulls stretching into the shadows, dark and silent. Decades of dust covered every surface. Neglect hung in the air like a heavy blanket. These vessels had been abandoned, forgotten, labeled as failures by a galaxy that had moved on to newer, shinier things. But Roy saw something different. The largest ship still had letters barely visible on her hull, faded but readable. Perseverance. Roy walked up to her slowly, reverently. He reached out with his weathered, calloused hand and placed it flat against the cold metal. The surface was rough under his palm, textured by time and space dust. "Hello, beautiful," Roy whispered into the empty bay. His voice echoed off distant walls. "Let's see what you've really got inside you." Roy moved into the Perseverance the very next day. Everything he owned fit into one duffel bag in a battered red toolbox that had been with him for 30 years. A change of clothes, some instant coffee packets, a worn blanket, and tools that knew his hands better than most people did. The ship was cold inside. No power meant no heat, no lights, nothing. Roy set up a portable camping lamp in what used to be the crew quarters and rolled out his blanket on the floor. The metal deck was hard and uncomfortable, but he'd slept in worse places. On the 3rd morning, Roy was elbow-deep in an access panel near the main corridor when he heard heavy footsteps. The Krell dockmaster appeared, his massive reptilian frame filling the doorway. The creature's scales were dark green and thick as armor plating. His translator box hung around his neck, crackling with static. "Human," the Krell said, his actual voice a series of deep rumbles and clicks that the translator struggled to interpret. This is embarrassing. For you, I mean. Everyone at the station is talking. Laughing." Roy pulled a corroded relay chip from the panel and examined it under his work light. "That's so. I will dispose of these wrecks for free. No charge to you. You can get your credits back, yes? Save face. Tell everyone you changed your mind." The Krell's tone was almost pitiful, like he was trying to rescue a child from a bad decision. Roy finally looked up, wiping grease from his hands onto an already filthy rag. "Appreciate the offer. Really I do. But I'm good." The Krell stood there for a moment, his large yellow eyes blinking slowly. Then he shook his massive head from side to side and turned to leave. Roy heard him muttering through the translator as he walked away. "Human stupidity, waste of money, why do they never listen?" Roy just smiled and went back to work. By the end of week 1, Roy had torn into every major system on the ship. He'd crawled through access tunnels, climbed into maintenance shafts, and opened panels that probably hadn't been touched in 80 years. And with each discovery, his suspicions were confirmed. The aliens were wrong about everything. Completely, totally wrong. The quantum drives weren't dead. Not even close. They were locked down tight, sealed behind security protocols that would make a bank vault jealous. Biometric scans, DNA verification, retinal patterns, voice recognition. These ships had been built for human operators only. The alien technicians who'd scanned them and declared the drives burned out had simply been locked out by the ship's own security systems. To their fancy scanners, a locked door looked the same as a broken engine. Roy made his way down to the engine room, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The quantum drive core sat in the center of the chamber, a massive sphere of dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Alien warning stickers covered it, written in 6 different languages. All of them said the same thing: inert, non-functional, do not attempt activation. Roy ignored the warnings and found the interface panel. He brushed away decades of dust and placed his palm flat against the scanner plate. Nothing happened for 3 long seconds. Then the plate glowed blue. A soft hum filled the chamber, growing stronger, more alive. The entire drive core began to pulse with light. A computerized voice echoed through the room, speaking perfect English with a slight southern accent. "Identity confirmed. DNA match verified. Captain authorization accepted. Welcome aboard, human. It's been a while." Roy felt his grin spread across his face. "That's more like it." The hull situation was even more interesting. Roy spent hours examining the outer plating with handheld scanners and his own experienced eyes. These ships had been built with experimental memory alloy plating, materials that were decades ahead of their time. The metal could adapt and shift its density based on threat assessment. If sensors detected incoming projectiles, the hull would harden. During normal flight, it stayed flexible to absorb impacts and reduce stress. But alien scanners couldn't read the fluctuations properly. To them, the constant shifting looked like structural damage, like the hull was cracking and weakening. In reality, the hull was perfectly intact and fully functional. Just misunderstood by species that didn't build the technology. Week 2 brought the environmental systems online. Air circulation kicked in, clearing out the stale atmosphere. Temperature controls activated, warming the cold corridors. Roy could finally sleep without 3 blankets piled on top of him. Week 3, the navigation systems came to life. Star charts updated themselves, calculating routes with speed and efficiency that impressed even Roy. Week 4 changed everything. Roy stood in the engine room again, his hand on the main control console. He'd spent 7 days running diagnostics, checking every connection, verifying every system. Everything showed green. He pushed the activation sequence. The quantum drive fired up for the first time in 80 years. The Perseverance didn't just run. She sang. A deep, thrumming harmony filled every corridor, every room, every inch of the ship. The vibrations were perfect, balanced like a finely tuned instrument. Roy made his way to the captain's chair and sat down. The seat adjusted automatically to fit him, memory foam conforming to his body. Control panels lit up around him in soft blue light. Every system responded instantly to his touch. Navigation, sensors, communications, shields. Everything worked flawlessly. The aliens had called this technology too unstable for commercial use. They'd standardized everything, stripped away the creativity and adaptability. They wanted every ship to be exactly the same, built from the same plans, using the same parts. But humans didn't build like that. Humans built with redundancy on top of redundancy. These ships had backup systems for the backup systems. If one component failed, 3 others could pick up the slack. No 2 parts were exactly identical. Each one had been custom-fitted, hand-tuned by engineers who cared about their work. Roy ran his hand along the armrest of the captain's chair, feeling the smooth material under his calloused fingers. They called you junk, he said quietly to the ship. They laughed at you. Said you were worthless scrap metal. But you're not. You're a masterpiece. Roy took the Perseverance out for her first real flight on a Tuesday morning. The station traffic controllers almost had a collective heart attack when he requested departure clearance. They'd seen the ship sitting dead in Bay 7 Delta for weeks. Now suddenly this old human wanted to fly it? Perseverance, please confirm you have functional engines and life support, the controller said nervously. All systems green, Roy replied, feeling the ship respond to his every command. Ready for departure. Copy that. You're cleared for Bay 7 Delta exit. Good luck, I guess. Roy guided the ship out of the bay smoothly. No shaking, no stuttering, no warning alarms. Just pure, clean power. He pushed the throttle forward and felt the Perseverance leap into space like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. First jump took him to the Helena system, 3 light-years away. The quantum drive spooled up in seconds. Most modern ships took at least a minute. Roy hit the jump and felt reality twist around him for just a heartbeat. Then he was there, sitting in a completely different star system. Well, I'll be damned, Roy muttered, checking the readings. Perfect jump. 0 drift. He was exactly where he'd aimed. Second jump went to the Cascade Nebula, another 4 light-years out. He ran full diagnostics while floating in the colorful gas clouds, checking every system under load. Everything performed better than the specifications promised. Third jump brought him back to Gamma 7. Total flight time, 3 hours and 42 minutes. He docked the ship just before lunch, his stomach growling for some real food. Roy climbed out of the ship and found a crowd waiting at the docking bay entrance. At least 50 people, maybe more. Aliens of every species, all holding scanners and data pads, all staring at his ship like it was some kind of miracle. A Vrelian engineer pushed to the front, his scanner held up and beeping frantically. His bulky frame was trembling, which Roy had never seen before. Vrelians didn't get excited easily. Impossible, the engineer breathed, his voice shaking. The energy efficiency readings? I've scanned this vessel 3 times and the numbers don't make sense. This ship is outperforming military-grade frigates. Modern ones. New ones. Roy shrugged. She runs pretty good, yeah. Pretty good? Pretty good. The Vrelian looked like he might faint. Your fuel consumption is 40% lower than anything in civilian use. Your jump accuracy is beyond what I thought possible. Where did you get this technology? Came with the ship, Roy said simply. Just had to turn it on. By afternoon, Roy couldn't walk 10 feet without someone stopping him. The first offer came from a Peltharian trader who owned a shipping company. 2 million credits, cash right now. Not for sale, Roy told him politely. Second offer came 15 minutes later. 2.5 million. Then 3 million. Then 4 million. By the time Roy made it to the station's main corridor, he turned down 6 separate offers. The lowest had been 2 million credits. The highest was 4.8 million. Not for sale, he repeated to each one, his tone getting less polite each time. By evening, Roy just wanted a quiet cup of coffee. He found a table in the back corner of the station cantina, hoping nobody would notice him. He should have known better. A wealthy Quilnari merchant spotted him and swooped over, his colorful feathers rustling with each step. The bird-like alien sat down across from Roy without asking permission. "Human, we need to talk business," the Quilnari said, his sharp eyes gleaming. "I've heard about your ship. Very impressive. Very valuable. Name your price." 10 million credits. Cash transfer, immediate. Roy sipped his coffee slowly. It was terrible coffee, bitter and weak, but it was hot and caffeinated. "She's not for sale." 15 million, the merchant countered instantly. 20 million. "I can go higher." "I didn't buy her to sell her," Roy said, meeting the alien's eyes. "I bought her so I wouldn't have to ride that damn overcrowded bus every morning. You know how miserable that bus is. 300 passengers crammed into a space meant for 200. Standing room only. Takes an hour to go 15 miles. The Quilnari's feathers ruffled in complete confusion. His head tilted to one side, then the other, like he was trying to process information that didn't compute. "Wait. You spent 400 credits to avoid public transportation? That's it? That's the only reason?" "Best 400 credits I ever spent in my entire life," Roy said with complete honesty. The merchant stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked away, muttering something in his own language that the translator couldn't quite catch. Word spread through the galactic community faster than a virus. Within days, every spacer and trader in 3 sectors had heard about the human who'd bought junk and turned it into a racing ship. Within 2 weeks, engineering forums across the galaxy were debating how he'd done it. Within a month, the Galactic Transit Authority had enough complaints from commercial shipping companies that they had to take action. The inspectors arrived on a Thursday morning. 5 of them, representing 4 different species, all carrying official badges and serious expressions. They spent 6 solid hours examining the Perseverance from bow to stern. They scanned every system, checked every component, searched through every line of code in her computers. They were looking for violations, illegal modifications, black market technology, anything that would let them shut Roy down. They found absolutely nothing. The ship was exactly as built 80 years ago. Every part was original. Every system was stock. The only difference was that someone finally understood how to maintain her properly. Someone who'd actually read the manuals, who knew what each component was supposed to do, who cared enough to do the job right. The lead inspector, a stern Drellian with gray skin and no sense of humor, handed Roy the clearance certificate with obvious reluctance. "Your vessel passes all safety and operational standards," he said stiffly. "You're cleared for continued operation." Roy took the certificate and smiled. Glad to hear it. The third ship, Defiance, took Roy 6 months to restore. She was smaller than the Perseverance, more compact and agile. Built for speed and efficiency rather than raw power. Roy could tell just by looking at her systems that she'd been designed for quick runs, short hops between stations and planets. Perfect for what he had in mind. Roy gutted the cargo hold and rebuilt it from scratch. He installed 20 passenger seats, each one with proper padding and legroom. Real legroom, not the cramped knee-crushing spaces the interdimensional buses offered. He added storage compartments overhead, climate control that actually worked, and windows. Actual windows so passengers could see the stars instead of staring at blank metal walls. The route he planned was simple and obvious. Station Gamma, 7 to the industrial sectors where workers like him spent their days. The machine shops, the repair docks, the manufacturing plants. Places where regular people worked regular jobs for regular pay. Roy set his fare at half what the interdimensional bus charged. 50 credits per trip instead of 100. He figured if he could fill even half the seats, he'd make enough to cover fuel and maintenance with a little left over for himself. The first week he carried 12 passengers total. Most of them were humans who'd heard about his ship through the station gossip network. They climbed aboard nervously, not quite believing this was real. "You're really charging 50 credits?" one older woman asked, clutching her transit card like Roy might change his mind. "That's right," Roy confirmed. 50 credits, comfortable seats, and I'll have you there in 20 minutes instead of an hour." The woman smiled for the first time in what looked like years. Word of mouth did the rest. By week 2 Roy was carrying 30 passengers a day. By week 3 he had to start taking reservations. Workers started timing their shifts around his shuttle schedule instead of the bus schedule. By month 2 the Defiance was fully booked for every single run. Roy added more trips to his daily schedule. Early morning, mid-morning, lunch hour, evening rush. Workers who'd spent years cramped in overcrowded buses, standing for an hour with someone's elbow in their ribs, now traveled in actual comfort. They arrived at their jobs rested instead of exhausted. They went home with energy left for their families instead of collapsing on their couches. That's when the problem started. The transit unions filed formal complaints with the station authorities. Roy was undercutting their prices, stealing their passengers, violating regulations they swore existed somewhere in the legal code. The major transport corporations went even further. They threatened lawsuits. Massive ones. They claimed Roy was operating an illegal commercial transport service without proper licensing. They demanded he be shut down immediately and fined heavily. Roy hired a lawyer. Not some fancy corporate attorney, just a regular human lawyer named Dale Porter who specialized in transportation law. Dale was 63, balding, and had a reputation for actually reading the fine print that everyone else ignored. Dale spent 3 days in the legal archives and came back grinning. "They can't touch you," Dale said, slapping a data pad on Roy's table. Antique personal vessel. Under the Heritage Preservation Act, Section 47, any vessel over 50 years old operated by its owner for personal use is exempt from commercial transport regulations. You own the ship. You're operating it yourself. It's 80 years old. They've got nothing. The corporations fumed. They argued and threatened and demanded special hearings. But the law was crystal clear. They couldn't change it without a full vote in the Galactic Council, which would take years and probably fail anyway. Roy kept flying. Then one evening Roy received a message on his personal comm. The sender ID showed another human, someone he didn't know. He opened it cautiously. "Mr. Patterson, my name is Beverly Morris. I'm 72 years old, retired aerospace technician. I heard what you did with those ships from the auction. I've been watching the listings and there's a human cargo hauler coming up for auction on station Epsilon 12 next week. They're calling it scrap, same as yours. I've got the credits saved up. Do you think someone like me could do what you did?" Roy sat back in his chair and smiled. He typed out a reply with coordinates, technical manuals he'd scanned, and detailed instructions on what to look for. 3 weeks later, Beverly sent him a photo. She stood in front of her restored ship, Wanderer, wearing coveralls covered in grease stains. Her gray hair was tied back and she was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. The ship gleamed behind her, lights on, engines humming. "She flies like a dream," Beverly's message said. "Thank you for believing an old lady could do this." More messages followed. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. A guy named Gregory Hayes found 2 scout ships at an auction on the Outer Rim. Bought them for 600 credits total. Had them flying within 2 months. Patricia Wu, 70 years old and supposedly too old to work anymore, restored a mining vessel that the corporations had declared completely dead. She started hauling ore for independent prospectors at fair prices. Vincent Briggs hit the jackpot at a station clearance sale. 4 transport shuttles, all human-made, all written off as worthless. He paid 800 credits for the entire lot. Within 6 months, he had all 4 flying routes that the big companies had abandoned as unprofitable. They started calling themselves the Grease Monkey Collective. Retired mechanics, engineers, technicians, and anyone else who knew which end of a wrench to hold. Humans who'd been pushed out of their jobs, told they were obsolete, that they didn't understand modern systems. Turns out they understood just fine. They understood better than anyone else in the galaxy. Within a year, 70 ships were flying under human operation. Within 18 months, 150. Each one restored by hands that knew real work. Each one bought for pocket change at auctions where aliens laughed at human technology. The corporations finally realized their mistake. They'd sold humanity's best technology back to humans for scrap prices. And now those humans were competing directly with them, offering better service at lower cost. There was nothing the corporations could do about it except watch their profits shrink. 2 full years had passed since that memorable day on Station Gamma 7. The day when an old mechanic named Roy Patterson decided he was tired of riding crowded buses and did something nobody thought was possible anymore. Now, sitting comfortably in the captain's chair of the Perseverance, Roy was going through the latest reports, and the numbers still amazed him every single time he looked at them. 237 ships. That's how many vessels were now flying under the Collective's banner. Every single one of those ships had been rescued from junkyards and forgotten storage facilities. Every one had been restored by human hands, brought back to life by people who'd been told for years that they were obsolete, that their skills didn't matter anymore, that machines and algorithms had made them unnecessary. But here was the thing that made Roy smile every time he thought about it. Those ships weren't just flying. They were thriving. Humans who had given up hope were now captains, navigators, engineers. Families who couldn't afford the expensive modern transport were now traveling between planets in comfort. Small business owners who'd been priced out of shipping were now running their own cargo operations. Of course, the Galactic Council hadn't been happy about any of this. Not one bit. When they realized what was happening, when they understood that humans had figured out how to operate an entire fleet of ships that were supposed to be worthless, they'd panicked. They'd scrambled to find some way to stop it, to take back what they'd so carelessly thrown away. Roy remembered the day the emergency legislation was announced. He'd been working on restoring another freighter when the news broke. Reclamation of improperly distributed strategic assets. That's what they called it. Fancy words that really just meant they wanted to steal back the ships that humans had legally bought and paid for. But they hadn't counted on Ambassador Margaret Walsh. Roy had never met her in person, but after what she did that day, he wanted to shake her hand. The council had called a special session, probably expecting to rush the legislation through. Margaret had stood up, and in 45 seconds flat, she'd destroyed their entire plan. Her words were simple and devastating. These ships had been sold at legal, public auctions. The sales were binding contracts under galactic law. If the council tried to seize private property from human citizens, they would be violating approximately 267 different interstellar treaties. And humans, she'd reminded them with ice in her voice, had excellent lawyers. She'd actually invited them to try it, knowing they wouldn't dare. The legislation had died right there on the chamber floor. No vote. No debate. Just a quiet acknowledgement that they'd been outmaneuvered by the species they'd underestimated. Last week, Roy had gotten an unexpected call. A reporter from Galactic News wanted an interview. The journalist was a young Peltharian, earnest and curious, asking questions that showed he actually wanted to understand what had happened. "How did you know the ships would work?" the reporter had asked. It was the question everyone wanted answered. Roy had thought about it before responding, wanting to get it right. "I didn't know for certain," he'd admitted honestly. "Nobody could guarantee it would work. But I understood something those auction buyers didn't understand. Something fundamental about how humans build things." He'd explained it in the simplest terms he could. Humans build things to last. Always have, probably always will. When human engineers design something, they don't just make it work for today. They over-engineer it. They plan for failures that might never happen. They add backup systems and redundancies. They make things reparable because they know things will break eventually. And here's the crucial part, the thing that made all the difference. Humans never throw away knowledge just because it's old. Other species moved on to new technology and forgot how the old stuff worked. But humans? They kept the manuals. They preserved the training programs. They remembered. "What about the corporations?" the reporter had pressed. "They're calling this a disaster for the transport industry." Roy had actually laughed at that. Those same corporations had mocked him, dismissed him as a foolish old man who couldn't accept progress. They'd forgotten something important about humans. When you push them down, they don't just stay down. They adapt. They find new ways. They persist. And they never forget how things really work, even when everyone else has moved on. That interview had gone viral, spreading across 15 different star systems. Roy had gotten messages from humans he'd never met, thanking him, telling him their own stories of restoration and revival. These days, Roy took the Perseverance out every weekend just for the pure joy of flying. He'd plot courses that took him past those interdimensional buses, the ones that were still packed with uncomfortable passengers paying premium prices. He'd wave at them through the viewport, a friendly gesture that felt incredibly satisfying. But the best part, the thing that made Roy proudest, was what came next. He taught 83 other humans how to restore these ships. 83 people who now had the knowledge and skills to bring dead vessels back to life. And those people were teaching others. The knowledge was spreading like wildfire through human communities across the galaxy. Humans were actively seeking out auctions now, buying back their own legacy one forgotten ship at a time. Every week brought news of another restoration, another family getting their own vessel, another small business launching with their own cargo ship. Just last month, Betty Morris had called him, practically shouting with excitement. She'd found something big. An entire warehouse full of old human medical frigates, the kind that used to serve remote colonies and disaster zones. Ships that corporations had declared worthless and abandoned. "Roy," she'd said, her voice trembling with possibility. I think we're going to need more mechanics. Roy had smiled, that same smile he'd worn 2 years ago when he first stepped aboard the Perseverance. He looked out at the stars, at the vast possibility of space, and felt something he hadn't felt in years before all this started. At 69 years old, with gray in his hair and decades of experience in his hands, Roy Patterson had never felt more alive. He wasn't obsolete. None of them were. They were exactly what the galaxy needed, even if it had taken everyone this long to realize it. Then let's get to work, he told Betty, already planning the training programs they'd need. We've got ships to save. And they did. Hundreds more ships waiting in forgotten corners of the galaxy. Thousands more humans ready to learn. A whole legacy waiting to be reclaimed, one restored vessel at a time. The end.